One of my least favorite parts of my lathe is that nut on top of the quick tool exchange tool, post there. And one of my favorite um, YouTube channels for machining is Inheritance Machining. And by luck, Brandon has a video on there with never having to deal with this again. So this is my interpretation of a project that he's done in the past. And once again, I'd just like to say that if you're looking for a how-to, this is not the video. All I'm doing here is just documenting some of the stuff I've been doing during my apprenticeship, and I'd highly recommend not taking this as proper or safe at all. But anyways, the first thing I did, I picked up this piece of machinery to do the spider in the side of the machine, on the side of the lathe here. So of course, just marking it out to make sure I've got enough material left on that thing for the spider and a spare one in case I miss one out before I start cutting this piece up. And you'll see by this piece here that there is that secondary mark, so I did have to remark it after I took the measurements of the threads inside the machine. I'd also like to say that I am really still impressed with this bandsaw. Just being able to move that up and then turn the crank and it's all of a sudden tight is just phenomenal. It saves a ton of time. However, I do still have some issues with this saw not stopping, or in this case, when it comes down, stopping prematurely. I still have to sit down and actually get it calibrated to where that saw stops after it's cut through the material. Yeah, this part here, saw stopped. Have to reuse that little piece up there to make sure that could get to the material. And of course, it was really rough estimate on where it went just to get this piece cut so I could get on with this. And of course, I got a small shop, so a lot of these tools like this saw get put back in their location once everything is said and done. And of course, just by looking at the material, if I do make a mistake in this, I do have that secondary piece that's about the same size that I can try again. First thing, um, change the chuck, and as you can see, I figured this key would actually fit in that, and of course it didn't. And so, better try it again just to make sure. And of course, it didn't fit again. Um, but the second time, I realized it just wasn't going to fit in there, and I pulled it off on the other side to get the collet chuck off the lathe and put a four jaw chuck onto the lathe. You see right there, I put that key up on top, and for me, that's a complete no-no. I have places for those keys to go, and they're supposed to be back in those places when they're not in use. Now, I realize that the lathe's not going to run until I get this chuck on it, but it's still not somewhere that I should be leaving the key. I don't actually like putting too much stuff on top of it. I really don't want to see something, vibrate loose and fall onto uh, the chuck of the lathe while it's running. And one thing I also gotta say about that four jaw chuck, sometimes it's just super simple to get the material aligned in there, and sometimes it just takes forever. So the next thing I got to do here is square everything up to that chuck, and of course using the 1, 2, 3 block um, is for me the easiest way probably to do it, and might be a little better if I did have a tool in there instead of going off the top of that. But for the work I'm doing on there, it's very accurate. I don't think I needed to be any more accurate than that. And again, getting rid of this nut I will not need that wrench around there anymore. I just don't like having extra tools in around the lathe that I could do without. I don't know, less clutter the better, in my opinion. Again, this little gauge I picked up is just fantastic. Um, Very easy to use and very accurate. And of course, taking this thing out of gear, that chuck will just not move around freely if it's in gear. And of course, as you can see, that's nowhere near close. Um, so it's time to do some adjustments, and there was quite a lot of adjustments to do. Finally, what I ended up doing is taking the piece of metal out of the chuck and resetting all four of the teeth on that. And as you can see now, after I did that, it's fairly decent to true, at least good enough for what I need to do with it. The next thing we're doing here is just taking it down to the size of the the top of uh, that tool holder, which I think was 2 inches. And then from there, I preset an angle gauge to see if I get away with an angle that I wanted to. And it worked pretty good. You know, it's a little more of a taper than what's on there now, but I think at the end of the day, it looks pretty sharp. There were some problems with this piece. One of them was when I put it in the milling machine, I needed to drill an angle in it on 20 degrees, and the drill kept falling out of the collet, and eventually, you know, everything just got messed up. So I did get it drilled to put a tap in it, but I did want a countersink or counterbore to have that handle actually go into it like the one that's currently there, and it was just no way. And I just really don't feel now that I want to take it back after everything's done and cleaned and redo it. And you can see there by putting my chronometer on it, I'm exactly where I want to be on this. And the next thing to do is actually start cutting the taper on this. And I believe it was, I believe I went with a 30-degree taper on it. So I had to change the angle down to 15 degrees to reflect that on each side. It was actually a lot of work. You know, when you get used to, you know, just flicking a switch and having your tool run down the piece of material was a lot of work actually just running that back and forth and back and forth and pushing it in and bringing it back. And, you know, I really had to do something about this mist-in system. It's either all out or very little at all. And I think it probably, you know, good 2 hours. At least I know it took me 2 hours on the handles to do the tapers and everything. Well, 2 hours pretty much completely per handle for this project. But I think it was about the same amount of time doing the taper on this as well. Hindsight, I really didn't want to change the gearing in the lathe to metric, and it is a metric thread on top of that tool post. And like I said, I just didn't want to change the gearing to cut metric threads and have to deal with the fact that you can't take it out your half nut apart on that. So I decided to drill a hole in that and actually go in with just a normal tap. I did think I cut enough material to get it far enough in there, but when I tested it out for the first time, it was too short. So I had to go back in with a boring bar and clean out the bottom a little bit. And I actually had to pick up another tap because I didn't want to grind mine, but I needed to pick up another tap and grind the top off the tap. So when it started to go in, it was actually going on full teeth. This is just about the end for this piece, short of cutting off, and I decided not to cut it off in the lathe. It was quite a hefty extension on my cutoff tool or my parting tool. So later on, there's a little bit of video just showed it in the saw getting cut off, and I got to say it lined up really nice for that. There was no real difference between where the saw was cutting and where the lines were. And a little bit of polishing. I did take this down further with some finer emery cloth, and of course running on a polishing wheel or buffing wheel to clean it up a bit. I'm not sure yet if I'm going to take the metal pieces that are steel in color or silver in color and blue them so they got a nice gloss black to them with the brass, or if I'm just going to leave them as is. Right now, the project's actually not completely done. There's a couple rings I got to build for the handles, and then I got to decide really what I'm going to do with that one handle when it's going into this piece here. If I'm just going to leave it, or if I'm going to actually countersink it into there. And of course, on this you can see where I got a ring on that drill where it needs to stop, and of course watching the numbers as well on a tailstock. The drilling part of this is probably the quickest part out of everything. I think it was like 5 minutes and the whole thing was drilled. And of course, after it got drilled, that's the point where I realized I had to buy another tap, and the project sat on the side for about a week until the other tap showed up. I think this is the last step of the drilling right here. I also did find, like, on my tailstock, and you see that the locking lever is up there, but for some reason I find that that tailstock likes to drift back a bit, and of course that's going to throw the numbers totally out. But that's something I have to look into for in the future. Right now, it's kind of doing what I want it to do, and I got other projects I need to get done, like the bar that goes through my milling machine needs to be made in Imperial, so I can actually use the the collets and tools I have, and not just rely on a couple of real cheap ones that came with the milling machine. So, something else, like when I did get the larger tap, the uh, the base of the tap was actually a different size of the tool holding I had, and I think it was about 3 minutes or so that I took this tap and I was trying to get it in, and I was loosening it up and thinking it was off centered, and it just would not go at all. And then all of a sudden, I'm looking at the end and grabbing another tap and look at the end of it, and realize right away what the problem seems to be here, and it's just a little bit bigger, and it's not going to fit the tooling. So I did have to use the largest handle I got, and as you can see, it actually hits on the lathe, so it's got to come off and on and off and on all the way down, which was quite a pain. But at the end of the day, grinding that tap down gave me the extra threads I needed to actually get this on and get it to the point where it was secure and not moving. So I was very happy at this point right here. The next part was for the handle, so I put put my digital angle finder on there, and it said 19.4 or something like that. And then I decided to, cut that piece off and get it finished up and get the hole drilled in it at about 20 degrees for the handle that had to go into that. And like I said, I am really impressed with this saw. I think it was one of the better purchases I made. And as you can see there, the cut nice and clean. Um, so yeah, we're 20.5 now on that handle, so it just went up a little bit. And the other handle needed to be about the same. So I got this in there with different sizes of No, and I can't think of the name of them right now. But anyways, I double checked it with the 20-degree angle to make sure I was sitting at zero before I started drilling because there was a lot of work into that one piece. And of course, it got marked before it actually, when it was on there, it got marked. So the hand would be in the right place when it was all nice and tight. And this is the part where that Jacob's chuck actually just kept falling out of the mill machine. Once I started getting the hole up to size, and it was time to, grab that handle and actually figure out what size thread has to go in, so I'm not going to cut larger than it needs to be. And of course, it was a metric thread, and had to do a little math, and I actually had to go and buy some new drill bits. I think it was a 9.5 millimeter drill bit I used to finally drill that hole in there. Now you can see here on this collet chuck, it's like way out of alignment, and you can also tell, by the way that drill is just wobbling back and forth. I did put this back in alignment a little later on for some final work on it, and it fixed everything up. But that went from being perfectly aligned to coming off and sitting in storage for about a month to being totally out of alignment when I picked it back up and put it back on. But a little tap on the hammer, and it came back to being very true. So these were a lot less worry. Didn't have to worry about these as much as the last ones, um, because it was the handles that were going in. So the handles had a mill end on it to go in, and I just was able to make these like twice as deep as the mill end on the handles, so they just threaded right in. I got to make some little rings to go on there, and like I said, I don't know if I'm going to blue all the steel, but if I'm not, I'm going to cut a couple little steel rings for in there and blue them and bring them up to a nice black, shiny, glossy polish on them, just to give a little bit of contrast between the copper or the brass, I should say, and the steel. And the other side of that was the mill side that actually goes into the clamping parts on the lathe. The actual handles themselves, after I got the end knobs done, they went onto the handles and checked to make sure everything was in alignment and sized right, and then threw them back on the lathe just to give them a final clean up and a polish, and before I took them and put them on the buffer wheel to shine them up. And of course, like there's it getting turned around to have the other side, threaded on so they can go into the clamps. Well, at this point, getting pretty close to finishing this project. Yeah, and for some reason, my phone liked to focus on the shirt instead of the work I'm doing here. So great video shot there of the shirt. Though I'm really not trying to be a YouTube fan here. Like I said, I'm just documenting the stuff I'm doing. And at the end here, like just doing a little bit of a cut on this just to clean it up a bit and get it to the proper size. Now, time to do the handles, just facing the end of them and, drilling out the end before I stick the material a little further and start tapering the handles down and making the part of them that gets threaded into the brass. And like the first, I'm not actually sure how long that first handle took me, but I know I timed the second one, and the second one got completed from having nothing done to it at all to being completely done with being polished in about 2 hours. So I can see where other people are saying how long it takes to actually do some machine, and I think I picked the right trade to get in here to retire with, because probably take you a long time to do some of those big intricate projects that some of these people are doing. Of course, trying to get a little lubricant on there just to get a little more life out of my tools. Like I said a little earlier, I tended to go through a lot of inserts without the lubrication, and parting off without the lubrication. Wow, we all know what that does. That tends to snap blades and make people panic. So there are the parts required for the completion of the job, and overall, I'm rather happy with them. There are some things, if I had to do it all over again, I would do differently. But looking at that, the next thing I'm thinking is maybe I should do all the other handles on the lathe the same. And you can see right there where that top handle is just not looking that great. It really needs to be a countersunk in there. And one day I'm going to have to do that somehow, because if you look at it right there, it just doesn't look all that nice or professionally done. And that gap up there between the two, that's where the little rings are going to go. And like I say, I don't know yet what's getting blued and what's staying natural. And that's about it for this project. Hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks to Brandon.